The Old Testament, those stories, they're not so much to do about the past. They are like these eternal, ever-present stories that are just re-emerging constantly.
We have people openly saying, not just, oh, it's the Zionists. They're saying, oh, no, it's the Jews. And I want to go, there's really nothing, as Ecclesiastes says, there's nothing new under the sun. Like, every story has been told, everything has been written before, and it's really just about, like, your take on your time with these, I don't know, certain set of themes that we're given as human beings. You really can't escape it. So anti-Semitism is one of those things. It's not only 70 or 80 years old. It's not only 2,000 years old. It's like 4,000 years old. And in fact, you see it all the way back to the beginning with this fratricide, right? Our culture is animated by the spirit of Cain. It's Cain walking around in an Abel skin suit. So at a certain point, you have to go, crap, I think this is just going to play out the way it's going to play out. It's because it's a spirit. It's like the more you raise awareness about it and the more you try to come at it with facts and logic, the more hate it produces. Be a world changer, like write the book that's going to change everybody's opinions. And now I do not believe that anymore. So to think that we are the generation who's going to put an end, like there have been movements who have said, we've defeated anti-Semitism. One of them was East Germany, for example. We've defeated anti-Semitism in our midst. Really what they did was they suppressed Jews and made them all flee.
When you say you've seen fairies...
Okay, so, look, lots and lots of people have seen phenomena they can't explain. Things like going to my friends' houses for sleepovers and doing seances and all of that. And I acquired a lovely demon by doing these things. And that was very real, I can tell you for sure.
I think it's been a falsity that we are just these rational beings, and that the more we get rid of myths and religion and faith and spirituality, all that stuff, if only we could free ourselves from this, finally humanity will rise up away and break from the chains of the irrationality of all of those made up stories. And that's actually what's happened, is as we've broken away from them, I think we've become more irrational. All right, Vesper, welcome to the show. It's an absolute honor to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Ali. I'm really excited for what we're going to talk about.
Awesome. Yeah, me too. Now look, in today's conversation, I do want to talk about the topic of evil with you and the ways in which we ought to confront it, because it's not immediately obvious that there is an easy approach to it. Because I think one of the things that's threaded together so many of the atrocities over the last 100 years has been the good intentions of people behind it, but so have all the good things as well. They've also come from good intentions, and it's really hard to navigate this line of how we ought to confront evil without making things worse. So that's one of the things I want to talk about with you today. And I also wanted to speak with you about your experiences with the occult, with witchcraft, with Wicca in your teenage years, and how some of your early childhood experiences of abuse at the hands of family members may have created an opening for you to explore those kind of dark forms of spirituality, and perhaps what that can teach us about our current moment, in a sense. But I also want to explore the ways in which darkness is manifesting in the world right now, almost following a predictable pattern in the world. And as an author who has spent a lot of your time, writing about the Holocaust and paying close attention to what's happening in the world right now, I'm just really curious to kind of see how you're interpreting the current moment, whether there is an almost inevitability to it, and whether there's any way to kind of slow down or stop this slow motion train wreck, or whether now it's just time for us to fasten our seatbelts a little bit for the next 5 or 10 years. But before we get into all of that, for listeners who may not be familiar with your work, I'd love for you to give us an introduction to who you are, your background, the kind of work you do, and your kind of main area of focus in your work.
Well, I want to state off the bat, with all the things we're going to talk about, I am not a political pundit. I'm not a political thinker. I'm an artist. I'm an author and an illustrator, and I write historical fiction and illustrate picture books. So I kind of like straddle these two worlds between like the deep childhood and, the adult and the coming of age and all of that. And, reckoning also just with these large historical themes. So I'm really interested in normal people, average people who don't necessarily become heroes in their times, but they're they're navigating their, extraordinary times, which I don't know, there's
Mm,
always an extraordinary time to be living in. We are in one.
mm, mm.
But it's not about waiting for the heroes to emerge or, these like large figures. It really is about these quotidian decisions that we make every day.
Mm.
And, as Solzhenitsyn says, the line separating good and evil passes through every human heart. We're presented with those choices every single day. So as an artist, that is really a major theme that I'm, exploring in my work.
Yeah, I love that a lot, and I think I've spoken about this before. Is our mutual love for the movie A Hidden Life, and the quote of A Hidden Life speaks to this, that the world isn't so bad and things aren't so ill with you and I, thanks to those who lived faithfully a hidden life
Yeah.
and rest in unvisited tombs and graves. And so I think that's a really lovely sentiment. And I love that you're not a political pundit. It's not what the world needs right now. I think the world does need the artists and the storytellers to come out and help us interpret what's going on. And so with that said, could you give us an idea of some of the work that you have produced and some of the books that you have made, and the particular themes and topics that you've grappled with, and also some of those kind of, not grand heroes, but those kind of intimate moments of humanity that shine through in your characters? I'm really fascinated to know.
Sure. The three novels that I have published are What the Night Sings, which is about the Holocaust, the post-Holocaust period. So what happened after everybody left the camps. We
Mm,
think maybe that it's kind of tidy and everything was over, but it was actually a really interesting and long period of healing. My
yeah.
second book is called A Cloud of Outrageous Blue, and it deals with the Black Death of 1348 and the power dynamics in that, and also, what people's sense of the supernatural and the spiritual did to their understanding of what was happening to them in the moment. And then my third novel is called Berliners, and it's a follow up to What the Night Sings. So, where What the Night Sings was dealing with the victims of the Holocaust, Berliners deals with what happened to the perpetrators and how German culture emerged into sort of its modern form 15 years later. So, it deals with the Berlin Wall going up in 1961, and it's a
Mm.
retelling of the Cain and Abel story.
Interesting. I'd love to. I've just made a note about the Cain and Abel stuff because it's become a story of high interest for me. And the more I revisit that really short story in the Old Testament, the more is just jumping out at me. And
Yeah.
it's just a fascinating one. So I'd love to explore that with you.
Hmm.
And there is another element to your work, which we briefly spoke about before off this call, which was there seems to be, Vesper, a way that you've been tapping into an undercurrent of reality, because those works that you just mentioned happen to correlate pretty on point with some pretty major things
Yeah.
that have been happening in the world. Now, just in case the audience missed it, would you care to enlighten us about maybe some of the connections in your work to the times?
Yeah, yeah. So I started What the Night Sings in at the end of 2014, going into 2015, and
Mm,
it was really just a personal curiosity. I grew up in a Jewish home. I wanted to understand a little bit more about the history, and in January of 2015, the Charlie Hebdo massacre happened, and the kosher supermarket massacre, and I thought, whoa, I'm reading about what anti-Semitism looks like, and here's this major attack. And so the whole way through producing that book, I was just starting to see these strange coincidences emerge between what I was reading in the history and what I was seeing play out. And I thought, oh, one thing that was really important that I learned was that this is a cyclical hatred, and it
mm,
comes up every 70 to 100 years, let's say once a generation. It's like clockwork. Every single generation has to deal with the question of anti-Semitism. It's it's not like a generic racism. It's a cyclical hatred that emerges when societies are crumbling. And it says way
mm,
more about the society that's engaging and entertaining Jew hate than it does
mm,
about anything having to do with Jews. So
mm,
that was emerging then when I was writing that book. And then the year that it came out in 2018, later that year, the Tree of Life synagogue shooting happened, and I just thought, we buckle your seatbelt. We are really in for a bumpy ride, and I just knew this. It wasn't going to settle down with these kind of like one-off attacks. I just
yeah,
knew something bad was going to come.
yeah,
Unfortunately, it did on October 7th, but
yeah.
with A Cloud of Outrageous Blue, I started writing that in 2017. It was sort of my most inner book. I was really dealing with the inner life. And then it came out in 2020,
Okay.
just totally unplanned as the world was dealing with this global pandemic. And
Mm.
so all of the dynamics that I had explored in how societies deal with plague, I was seeing them play out. And it was starting to get a little freaky because I thought, okay, I
Mm.
better be careful what I choose to write about, because it's not that I think I'm like prophetic or something like that, but it's like, okay, clearly something on my radar is like picking up what's happening in the ether, you know?
Yeah.
So that by the time I wrote my third book, Berliners, I sort of expected that it might happen. And so the that book really kind of tore me up as I was writing it. It was really difficult because whereas with What the Night Sings, I was dealing with the physical trauma of the Holocaust, the trauma to the body. With Berliners, I was dealing with things like state propaganda and like the games that the East German government would play with deeply unsettling the psyche and things like that. It wasn't just East Germany; it was like the Soviet project had a
Mm.
lot to do with that. And so I would be researching in these scholarly texts, reading speeches by different leaders and everything, and then that same week I would hear the same phraseology come out of, for example, Joe Biden, and I
Wow.
thought, what what is this time we are living in this generation that we have to deal with all of these things happening at once? It's like,
Mm.
the rise in anti-Semitism and what that says about our culture, the power shifts that happen in times of a plague and pandemic, and the state control, and this the state manipulation of our relationships with each other, and these political divisions that we would not have come up with on our own. There's a sense
Yeah.
that we're, in our culture, the way that we're engaging with information is really deeply destabilizing us.
Hmm.
All three at once. Wow, that's quite a lot to deal with.
Yeah. But what does that even, I mean, just is this just the role of the artist? I mean, not just yourself, but other artists that are tapping into something? Is there, like, have you given this much thought? Is it just coincidence for you? Do you feel like there's a angel on your shoulder repeating, telling you something that's coming to what, like, have
Yeah.
you, I'm just really curious, just if you could just like explain like what you are interpreting this as, just pure
Yeah,
coincidence
I
or?
have given this quite a bit of thought, as you can imagine. I I think that there is a role for the prophetic, for
Mm.
whether that's the classic, Old Testament prophet or something like that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who are, now we could get very woo woo on this.
I'm happy for this podcast to get a little bit woo woo. Just a heads up
Okay.
to the audience.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that artists are by nature temperamentally, we're very open people. We
Hmm.
There's something, maybe it happened in childhood or whatever it is, that caused us to trust the information that was coming our way through our senses, things we pick up. And I think in the artist, for some reason, that mechanism has not been closed off, right?
Mm.
So there's just things that we pick up on that are totally unconscious.
Hmm.
And that's what we make our work from. Whether it's that we're interested in painting beautiful flowers or writing about atrocities,
Yeah,
there's that kind of openness, right?
yeah.
But I think on a spiritual level, there's a writer named Father Pavel Florensky who was persecuted by the Soviets. He died in the 20s or 30s, I believe. And he wrote a book called Iconostasis. And in that book, he talks about the nature of spiritual reality being that there's essentially three layers to it. There's what we have here in the earthly realm, and there's the divine, which, is mostly untouchable, but sometimes we get glimpses of it. But in the middle of those, there's like this borderland, this barrier that we have to pass through in order to touch the divine. And what he alludes to is that artists, spiritual people, a lot of times we get up to the Borderlands, and it's really interesting up there. There's monsters there, there's you know realities hanging out there. There's kind of like the detritus of life, and it can be really interesting to make work about the things you encounter there.
Mm.
So, I think you could think about this with someone like Van Gogh. He was definitely approaching, he had spiritual concerns. He was concerned with higher matters and things, but there was something that he was always out of his grasp that he couldn't touch. And I think it's because he stayed in the border.
Mm.
And what Florensky says is that we need to aim, and we need to travel higher and touch the divine and bring the divine back through that borderland where it kind of crystallizes and becomes the stuff that we make as artists.
Mm.
All right. So
Mm. I
that's a
love that.
big aside, but it's really
Yeah.
interesting to think about that when you ponder where a lot of artists kind of get stuck, for example, in activism.
Yes.
Activism is very interesting. There's a lot to think about. Politics can kind of like really occupy your entire consciousness, and it feels really urgent, and it feels like I should really make work about this because maybe my work can shift and change these realities. But the fact is that when we stay there, first of all, the work, it's not work that endures,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
When we stay, sort of like hovering between heaven and earth,
Hmm.
it or between that borderland and earth, it doesn't really produce the timeless. I mean, Van Gogh would be an exception, I would think, but when you think about his life and what he
Yeah.
endured mentally,
Yeah.
I would say there's something that he didn't achieve,
Yeah.
you know? And so I'll just wrap this up by saying, I think that where artists can really serve themselves is to go to the place of prayer. So instead of
Yep.
trying to glean everything from this total myth of like the artistic genius or something, I don't really believe in that.
Interesting.
If we open ourselves to God to a greater degree than we're opening ourselves to the sort of twittering, you know,
Hmm.
dust of the borderlands or something, I think we'll touch something higher that we can bring into our work that's of a lot more value,
Mm.
you know.
Yeah. This is good stuff. I'm so glad we've got here really quickly.
Yeah.
This is kind of the point of the conversation today, because this topic of artist and activist and the lure of that temptation, which I've spoken about in my conversation with Martin Shaw,
Yeah.
who I know you're a friend of, and Jonathan Pajot,
Mhm.
likewise a peer of yours. And in those conversations, we're talking a lot about this idea of where the artist sits, and how, and Martin had this great line about the difference between the timely and the timeless.
Right.
And it's when I think about this temptation, it feels a lot like, or I should say, it rhymes with the story of Eden and the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And I'm taking an interpretation here that would be a bit like the knowledge of good and evil being a little bit like the knowledge of good and bad, morality and immorality. And there's this fruit, this low-hanging fruit that's right there. And the serpent is tempting you. They're saying, look, this is the way, this is what you ought to do. And what it kind of reminds me of is this feeling of activism, of social justice right now, that in your hand, in your gosh, the symbolism here is thick, but in your Apple iPhone, you're scrolling around with the access to the most urgent moral knowledge ever, and it's all consuming. And in this full consumption of the human being into this world of not only social media but activism, it is actually plummeting us all downwards. It's like a fall from grace in many ways. And you can kind of correlate that with the introduction of social media into the hands of young people, and the mental health crisis, the anxiety, the activism class, the way that various nefarious forces are using this to manipulate and subvert a generation. And there's something rhyming for me with this notion of artists being tempted with activism to the kind of Adam and Eve story with the fruit. Does that speak to you as well?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So there's a lot there. Um,
Yeah.
I think that this phenomenon of, as you said, the apple falling into our hands as a generation, that really came at kind of an apex. When I was younger, I'm not sure where this kind of began, but this message to young people that you guys are world changers and you're gonna say, and like you'd read in children's magazines about some kid who collected money in his backpack to buy books for some people group across the way, and it was always this sense that if you weren't doing something like that, there was something inadequate about you as a child. And
Yeah.
so it's this real kind of like mind trip that we've had now for maybe 3 generations that instilled in us as children, you are going to change the world. It's really fundamentally no different from what the Hitler Youth did or what the Free German Youth did or the pioneers, any of these like communist movements or socialist movements.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not an accident that as socialism is gaining in popularity, we're seeing more and more of this messaging for children, which I totally reject. I totally
Yeah.
resist. It's not the job of of a child. But you think of Jonathan Haidt in his book The Coddling of the American Mind. He talks about this generation that first got on social media, in their teens and went to college in 2014, you
Yeah.
know. And just like the inculcation of this value that to be a good person or to be a person who's of value to your society, it means you have to be an activist, but only an activist along this certain political band.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what I think is so horrendous, as a historical writer, is that I know where that I know where that band comes from. I know where all that messaging comes from. It's invented and it's modern. It's recent. It's not ultimately a human value.
Mm.
The social justice movement is not ultimately about really helping people. It's about
Yeah.
the person feeling like they're they're performing this kind of good girl and good boy kind of message.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
That's right.
think that it's a house of cards. It's built on a very bad foundation.
You mentioned something there as well before we go into your story about your early childhood and the occult and all that kind of stuff. You mentioned that you don't believe in this idea of the genius artist, and I'm wondering what your thoughts on that can give me insight to, and how you're actually viewing this all playing out, because it does seem that there's this almost weird idolatry of the artist, and what I guess what you're referring to is that they're tapping into something else. Is that what you're kind of insinuating?
What I'm saying is that artists are going to tap into this thing that I described.
Mm,
It's a temperament.
mm,
The question is their source of information or their source of formation
mm,
about the world. So I think sort of backwards and forwards through time. I'm kind of always like doing this, and so when I wrote my book about the plague, uh,
mm,
first of all my protagonists are artists in some way.
mm,
I don't really set out to do that. It just kind of winds up being, maybe it's the water I swim in, but they're all
mm,
young artists coming of age. And so in A Cloud of Outrageous Blue, it's this girl who's a visual artist. She draws on everything with bits of charcoal and whatever. But she has synesthesia, what we now know as synesthesia. But back then they wouldn't have known that this is, a brain anomaly. She just knows that she sees colors all the time, and she's experiencing the world in this way that at first she thinks everybody sees it that way, but as she grows older, she realizes people aren't seeing what I'm seeing, you know.
mm,
But people like her, until the Enlightenment, really, artists were formed in a Christian culture, a Judeo-Christian culture, let's say, in the
Yeah.
West. I can't speak to other cultures because I'm not from those cultures, but in the West, it's the Judeo-Christian framework that formed what artists were making. And there was a sense that that is just the role that you fulfilled in society was, well, I paint icons, or I make the pottery, or, and I'm part of a guild. There's nothing special about me. I've learned the skills to do this. And so I'm fulfilling my role that God ordained for me in my life. And that's how I think about my own work as an artist. I'm part of a continuum. There have been many before me, there will be many after me. And right now, it's my job to fully occupy my role as an artist in this time and make the work that I feel like that intersects with my time.
Yeah.
Where we started to get this idea of the genius artist, I mean, there's always been talk about the muse and things that goes back to the Greeks, but this like kind of celebrity artist worship really kind of is very post-plague. It's like it comes from the Renaissance, and it comes from like an abnegation of that worldview, of really an enchanted worldview. It like takes the enchantment of the world at large and it
Mm.
places it solely on the shoulders of the artist to perform enchantment, to perform
Mm.
genius. And ever since, I think that's where we've had artists who are tortured mentally because it's too much. It's too much to bear the weight of like the world's enchantment on your shoulders. You can't do it. You
Mm.
just make work about what you see and what's important to you. And
Yeah.
and I think, I think we both read Rod Dreher's Living in Wonder. When we realize the nature of reality and how the world really works, then everything is enchanted around us, in us, and through us, and we don't have to separate ourselves off from that. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, let's not get ahead of ourselves. I want to explore some of this stuff a bit later on with
Yeah.
you. We just went straight into it, which is awesome. But I want to bring it back to, some of your early childhood experiences,
Sure.
which I think you were kind of mentioning earlier, that that openness kind of didn't get shut off for you and for other artists as well. But I was wondering if you could kind of share with us some of the things that happened in your childhood that might have also played a role in your path as an
Sure.
artist and as a writer, and where you've ended up.
Hmm.
Particularly a story involving you as I think you're about 3 years old.
Hmm.
And so I was wondering if you could maybe share with us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. I come from a family that was very loving. My grandparents were very loving people. They had 5 daughters. Um, but there was a lot of unspoken trauma happening when I was born. So I was born to a very young mother in Germany on an army base. My biological father was abusive to her, and she was concerned that he would go after me. And so she fled with me back to New York. And that's where I was raised, largely by my grandparents. My mom, being so young and now being a single mom, had to go off to work. And so I was with my grandparents and kind of grew up in this large family with some of my aunts still at home and things. And when I was 3 years old, I was sexually abused by a family member who had also been making his way through my entire family for many
Wow.
years. So, and none of this was spoken.
Yeah. Okay.
So it was all happening under the radar, under the sort of veneer of, a big bustling family.
Mm.
When I was 3 years old, we were sitting at the dining room table, everybody around, and this individual was there. And as an innocent 3-year-old, I said, "Oh, remember when you did blah blah blah?" Now, and it was like a record scratch moment, and all of a sudden, everybody could talk about it.
Wow.
Everybody realized it had been happening to them too, and so it opened the conversation for many years to come. My
Oh my
grandparents
goodness.
really could never reconcile themselves to the fact that this was happening right under their nose.
Mhm.
Um, so
Wow.
from that time, I didn't realize as well when I was growing up that my mom was severely bipolar. And
Mhm.
this didn't come out until I was an adult. So
Mhm.
the whole, my whole upbringing, I had this wonderful stability of my grandparents who were great people, but I think in over their heads. And then in my immediate family, my mother's illness was just completely unmitigated. We
Yeah.
didn't, she had no diagnosis. All I knew was that I felt like she and I were living in two different realities
Mhm.
that only got more and more stark as I came into my teenage years. And I thought, I don't understand why she's behaving this way toward me. Like, I'm not doing anything wrong. I was familiar with the classic teenage tropes of, going out and like partying and doing drugs and sleeping around. I wasn't doing any of that stuff. I was in art school. Like, I went to an arts
Mhm.
high school in New York. I was really committed to that. I was straight edge. I wasn't
Yeah.
doing any of that stuff. And yet, when I would come home, which I tried not to do as much as I possibly could, I never knew which mom I was going to get. So
Right.
at that
Walking
time,
on, was it like walking on eggshells essentially when you
oh yeah,
got entered? Yeah.
oh
Okay.
yeah, and I so desperately wanted to have a sense um, that my parents wanted me around, and I didn't have that sense at all. And I didn't know why, because it didn't seem like it was my fault. Like I said, I didn't grow up with that kind of like, oh, it must be me. I knew it couldn't be me, but I didn't know why it was so out of control, and why I was facing this abuse
Yeah.
for no reason. It wasn't like my mom was an alcoholic or anything like that, so it just was. So I fought really, really, really hard from about middle school on. I kind of became conscious of this. I have to fight for reality with both fists at all times,
Mm.
because the grid for what's real is kind of always shifting in my home. And
Mm.
I moved out when I was 15, and it's the best thing that ever happened to me, or the best thing
Right.
that could have happened to me at that time. I was living in a studio apartment by myself. It was technically my mom's apartment, but she lived with somebody else and was never there. So around that time, I started to, because of the influence of a friend, I started to get into the occult, and is particularly Wicca.
Mm.
And I had had this kind of fascination since I was maybe in elementary school. I had done a class project, like a research project in fourth grade, back when we used to actually do those things. I did a project on superstition. And I was really
Okay.
interested in where saying God bless you came from or whatever. And it quickly kind of escalated into this fascination with the paranormal, with the occult from that age. Things like going to my friends' houses for sleepovers and doing seances and all of that. And
Wow.
that became a really, really powerful element of my thinking. And when I look back on it, I think, okay, on the one hand, I'm fighting so hard for my reality. And on the other hand, I'm perfectly aware that what I see is not all there is.
Hmm.
I can't say that I grew up with a belief in God or anything like that, but I just always knew that there was something real, very real, that I wasn't seeing.
Hmm.
And so you can imagine, those two things overlapping, and like the kind of weird mind games, from my mom and all of this stuff. I was just looking for something to tether myself to, something
Right.
stable to tether myself to that would help me understand the nature of reality. And I think that's why I got so heavily into the occult.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Hmm.
Okay. It was almost like this. It, it, for me, it sounds like you got comfortable with the permeability of what's real and what's not, almost
Yeah.
with like living with your mum almost,
Hmm.
and then kind of exploring that landscape more when it comes to the kind of occult was just maybe a way that you could explore it under your own control, maybe where you're not
Yeah.
beholden to someone else's weird flip flopping.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good way to put it. I think
Yeah,
because I think I had learned by that time to sort of trust my instinct. I felt like the directions I was going in, regardless of the occult, let's just say
yeah,
I got myself into this high school. My friends were good. I had quality people around me.
yeah,
And I think I had like a intuitive sense that my instincts were good.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so when the stuff about, let's say, like the astral plane came into being, there was something about that that resonated with me. It was like, oh, that makes sense. I think that's real. I
yeah,
still think that's real in a sense. It's probably
yeah.
that borderland I was talking about,
Right. Yeah.
Um, so I don't think I was coming out of left field in any way. I
Mm,
think about those things very differently now in terms of the nature of the messaging and the source of the information.
yeah.
Um, but yeah,
But how did this develop further for you? Was it just just a passing interest, or did you like go full in?
I would say I went full in as much as I could at the time. So this was pre-internet. So my friend and I were interested in Wicca, and we went to the bookstore. We went to the spiritual section of the bookstore, and we would just like pour through stuff, and we would get together and we would try to do spells, and but it was just she and I. And
Right.
at the time, I mean, because there was no internet, like if you wanted to find other people to practice with, let's say to form a coven or something, you had to like find some weird zine that had an address in the back for some PO box out in like Boise or something, and like there really was not, it wasn't easy to find other people. So that was kind of a saving
Mm,
grace, because I think if I had gotten into a community, it would have been a lot more
yeah.
difficult
Yeah.
to pull out of that.
Well, what would you say to people who are listening and thinking like this is just like none of this is any real, like there's no harm in any of this stuff. It's just people, a bunch of girls playing with like cauldrons and crystals and tarot cards. Like, what's the harm that can come from this? Like, what would you say to them?
Mm. Well, I would say that I acquired a lovely demon by doing these things, and that was very real. I can tell you for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
well, okay. I don't want to cut you off because I'm sure there's more you want to say, but
well,
like,
I'll
could you,
give you the
like,
nutshell
because
version.
this is going to be new. This is going to be like weird new information for people. And
Sure.
when I say that, like, I'm aware that this is actually very popular now
Hmm.
amongst young girls. I've seen the TikToks with people doing weird light languages and all this kind of stuff. Like, people need to grapple with the fact that this is a growing new religion
Yeah.
amongst young people, especially. You've been there, done that, and I think you're through the other end. And I think this is going to be an important kind of message that you can get across. So, first of all, I want to hear about this demon thing, and then anything else that was part of your experience there.
Yeah. So the part that I was really most attached to in all of this practice, excuse me, in all of this practice was astral projection. I
Mm,
wanted to open my eyes onto the astral plane and be able to see it and walk around and travel and all of this stuff. And so I was fascinated by this. So I had a book, and I would come home every day after school and I would open this book and I would like review and review and review and be like, okay, now I'm going to try it. And I would try it and I would just, you know, I'd feel some things, but I wouldn't have any success, right? And one day I did. And so I was laying down, it was after school, and I did this practice. I'm not going to say what it was. And all of a sudden I could see through my eyelids, my closed eyelids. And I thought, this is it. I, wow, it's happening. And I felt myself leave my body. And I was about 3 inches hovering above my body. And all of a sudden the phone rang. And it was so jarring that it like shocked me back into my body. And I felt that physically. And there was something off about the way I kind of went back in. It was almost like, I went cockeyed back into my body. And it was my boyfriend on the other end. And I, when I picked up the phone, I started shaking uncontrollably. And I said, I can't talk to you right now. I hung up. I let the shaking subside, and I looked at my hands, and my hands were black. They were like the color of my shirt. my fingertips.
Whoa.
And
Whoa.
I'm like looking at it like, is this, how can this be real? And I felt just like really askew, and that feeling really didn't leave for the next couple of years. And
Oh my goodness.
what transpired from there was like an endless jackhammer of uncontrollable thoughts, really, really horrible, wicked thoughts for the next 2 years. And on the outside,
Wow.
I was cool as a cucumber. I kept going to school. I was doing my art. I was, whatever. But inside, it was like, it was torture. It was absolute torture. And they were of the thoughts of the worst kind.
Yeah.
I will not even mention.
Like what? Like, can you mention some of the kind of thoughts?
They were just like pornographic, racist, violent, and I knew that they weren't coming from me because I didn't think or believe or want any of these things. But they were just, it was like always like a jackhammer, just always present.
Right. Right.
And so it was only after I became a Christian, it was about a year after I became a Christian, which was very unexpected, that a gentleman prayed for me and the demon left me. And just as physically as I felt it come in, I felt it physically leave. It was quite intense.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's
And so,
incredible. So what was that? Yeah.
so to your point about, this is like emergent, like people are, nobody's questioning this stuff anymore. Like to anybody who's at this point saying, oh, this is just something kids play around with or whatever, is to be a boomer. It's like,
Right.
that's such an old way of thinking. Everybody understands, who's paying attention, that this is real.
Yeah.
It just is.
And also I like to think about it in another way, which is like, well, if you want to entertain, like if you could just entertain the idea that this is real for a moment, who would it benefit in this scenario? Who would it benefit for people to believe that this wasn't real? It would benefit the kind of demonic forces you're talking about,
Yeah.
because they would benefit by people being naive to it. Is that kind of what you're
Of
kind of getting at as well?
course. Of course.
Yeah.
And it's not like, I mean, I don't know anybody who's been involved in the occult for any length of time for whom that involvement resulted in more sweetness and light.
Mm.
It's it
Right.
you you try to, it's almost like a drug. Like you try to like hold up, maybe you had some very enchanted moments at first. Like I've seen fairies, flying around the room. And maybe you think I'm crazy. I'm not, I'm really like,
No, no, no. When you say you've
so
seen fairies,
okay. So look, I think that lots and lots of people have seen phenomena they can't explain. Okay.
yeah,
And so did I see a fairy fly up to my face and I see a little face? And no. And was it Tinkerbell? No, no, no. But I saw lights flying around my room. And they were real as day. They were just lights flying around my room. And they weren't fireflies. It was little blue lights flying around my room. Okay, fine. That was very early on. And like I'm saying, like a drug, you have certain experiences in the beginning that are very fascinating and that seem innocent and seem magical and really beautiful.
yeah,
But it doesn't take that long before you need a more and more intense practice in the pursuit of that kind of sense of magic. And it doesn't work. It doesn't
mm,
deliver. It only drags you
mm,
down into more darkness, and you wind up becoming, I mean, people around you notice that you're not the same person you were,
mm.
that you're not as approachable, that there's a darkness. And I'm talking about, I never practiced black magic or anything like that. Everything I did was in the realm of the sweetness and light. And yet, this was my experience. It manifested this way.
Fascinating. That reminds me of Corinthians, Second Corinthians, a quote, you must know it. It says, and no wonder, for even Satan himself disguises
It's
as
an
an
angel of
angel of
light.
light. Yeah. Fascinating.
Like what? So this is what I'm talking about. That when artists were grounded in a biblical worldview, they would have known this. Maybe they wouldn't have been able to quote chapter and verse or whatever, but the worldview was such that you understood that there was good and there was evil,
Yeah.
and that those things manifested in your life,
Yeah.
and you, you know, you wanted to choose good.
Yeah.
Or at least
Yeah.
that was like a real, possibility. It wasn't so out of reach for you to choose the good. Now it feels
Yeah.
like choosing the good is sometimes a Herculean effort, that
Yeah.
many, many people and forces are going to be against you if you choose the good,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And I want to explore this a little bit more because I think for any audience that's watching this and going, well, this is definitely the woo woo episode, like stick with it because I think
Yeah, it doesn't end
I
there.
think through through this, I think we're going to be able to get in a moment
Yeah.
to better understand the way the darkness is manifesting in the real world today. In terms of, well, when I say real world, it's all real. I'm saying the rise of anti-Semitism, the rise of jihadist movements, the rise of communist ideologies, the darkness that is kind of approach not only societally speaking, but in our own lives, the falling away of trust and mercy and forgiveness and repentance in us. I think we're fracturing. We're living isolated lives. We are addicted to substance, technology, all those kinds of things. And I think I've found actually the best way of perceiving it is through this lens. And I spoke about this with Jonathan Pajot, and we talked a little bit about demonic forces. And he was describing it as an entry point to think about it in terms of like how you could think about the spirit of anger moving through a person or a crowd of people. And it was really helpful the way he described it. And I've been thinking about some of this stuff recently. And moving from a kind of individual experience with a demon to a kind of societal witness towards a kind of pattern, a kind of demonic pattern or a spiritual pattern playing out. There's this quote that says that you don't have ideas a lot of the time, ideas have you.
Yeah.
And very often you can almost tell what ideas a person has based on the way they look sometimes. So if you meet someone with the big bright blue hair and the badges all over their jacket with the various pride flags or Palestine flags, you can pretty much guess like 99% of what they think and believe
Sure.
about the world.
Hmm.
Same if you find a guy who's got a MAGA hat on, you can kind of predict a bunch of things. And you can think about this kind of playing out across society, that there are kind of certain spirits moving through a people. And I guess I wanted to talk about this with you. And maybe this is a good time to bring up the quote from St. Paul, who said that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual wickedness in high places. If I can take that quote from St. Paul, some of the stuff we've talked about here, and then try to look at what's happening in the world today with this sort of cyclical pattern of anti-Semitism,
Hmm.
do you see a connection? Do you see that there is a kind of an underbelly to this that isn't tied up just in the material, that there is something beneath it that you might be catching on to?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you mentioned the blue-haired person, I was one of those people. Like,
Yeah.
I think when I was coming of age, uh, I was this kind of like straight edge new wave hippie,
Yeah.
right? And we all dyed our hair weird colors and stuff, but like none of those things, whether you were goth or preppy or, punk or whatever, like those things did not bring along with them a sense of what your politics were. They just didn't.
Mm.
Like, okay, maybe if you were punk, you were a little bit more anarchist, but
Yeah.
nobody knew. Nowadays, when you see somebody present as whatever, as you're saying, it's locked in. It's like you know exactly what they believe, and there's this pressure to have your outward self conform to like a set of beliefs, and so to me that feels like, oh, that's manufactured.
Right.
That's not coming from the person. That's coming from a movement or a zeitgeist, or as you say, a spirit.
Right.
And I just really didn't see that. I mean, maybe I was blind to it, but it didn't seem like culturally that we were dealing with that
Right.
a very short time ago. This seems
Yeah.
fairly recent.
Yeah.
I do think, though, writing about history, that I mean, I have behind me a book called Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds.
Yeah.
And it's mainly talking about Victorian social contagions and things like that.
Yeah.
These things happen. Social contagions happen. You know, we're mimetic creatures. You know, we've heard that said before. And so, yeah, I do think that at certain times in certain cultural moments, these spirits, you know, manifest in these movements, in mass movements. And I think
Mm.
we've seen a number of them happen. Um, Almost like if you zoom out to the 30,000 foot view, you can see like clusters of people all moving together in these kind of ways, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I do believe, because I am now, you know, now I am a biblical thinker,
Yeah.
that there are powers and principalities and, you know, rulers in the heavenly places. Like those, that's explicitly said. So they
Mm.
manifest maybe as political movements or as hate movements or whatever,
Yeah.
but they manifest.
Yeah. What's disturbed you most about, walking this line of the artist and kind of looking deep into history and kind of almost evaporating out some of the details to find some of the core messages out of what was happening in the Holocaust and what was happening there, noticing the patterns and the precursors to what's happening, and noticing what leads a society up to that point. How have you coped, or how have you dealt with seeing it now play out in front of you, that what was happening in the past is kind of happening again? I think there's been
Mm.
a lot of references being made towards what's happening now to the past, but what's that been like for you?
Well, I just graduated from PTSD therapy.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Around the time of October 7th, that was one of numerous. Now I understand, and people may not like this language, but I'm using it in its literal sense. Um, I experienced a perfect storm of triggers to
Yeah.
my childhood trauma in
Yeah.
2023. And
Yeah.
it really didn't stop for 2 years. I just felt like I was getting punched and punched and punched. And
Yeah.
like I said earlier, October 7th, as horrendous as it was, I wasn't surprised by it, because I had been feeling that something big was coming, because you could start to notice the coalescing of, yeah, as you said, like these jihadist movements, and the actions were ramping up and they were getting more frequent and more bold, you know. The truck ramming in Nice comes to mind, you know, all these things.
Yeah.
So that didn't surprise me very much, but it was October 8th that really took me out. And
Yeah.
now I have friends in Israel. I have friends in Palestine. Um, the fact that I work, I teach in New York. Um, I had to cancel my class right afterwards because the protests um, were ramping up and they were calling for. I felt scared to go to work. So
Yeah.
in any case, um, it's not the it's not the attack that surprised me. It's the way that there was popular support for it among
Yeah.
people who had nothing to do with the PLO or Hamas, or, you know,
Yeah.
it wasn't like the terror cells were getting activated. You could almost
Right.
expect that. It was like the rank and file, like students and professors at Columbia, where my mom and my grandfather went to school, like, or, you know, people getting accosted on the train by mobs of people who were not Middle Eastern. You know, they were like lily white people wrapped in keffiyehs. Like, I don't know. I just, and here's what it did to me, Ellie. It's like I had been for 10 years like waving my arms, going, don't go down this road. You know, I would give book talks about What the Night Sings or about Berlin. You know, I would be
Yeah.
publicly speaking about listen, this is what you can notice, and don't go down this road. And it was as though the entire generation I had been writing for not only hadn't been paying attention to all of the books about the Holocaust that they had been given, and all the movies and all of the never again
Yeah.
messaging. It was like a big middle finger to all of that. It was like a
Yeah.
like now, 2 years later, we're at the point where we have people openly saying, not just, oh, it's the Zionists. They're saying, oh, no, 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 it's the Jews. And I want to
Yeah.
go, wow, everything I've done is worth nothing. So
Right. Yeah.
to answer your question, it's like, as an artist, that's what I've had to reckon with, is like, I think I had an overinflated sense of what my work could do. And I think it was
Right.
coming from that childhood message of like, be a world changer, like write the
Yes.
book that's going to change everybody's opinions. And now I do not believe that anymore.
Yes. Yes. Gosh, that's. I really feel that when you're saying that, and I think filmmakers also experience a little bit of this. Like as a documentary filmmaker myself, like also witnessing not only my own work but other people's work, really important work and stories that have either been produced and not made a difference, or stories that are really important just not get picked up.
Oh, the whole
And
thing about
there is
Toronto
a
recently.
yeah, yeah,
Horrifying.
and it's just there's this disillusionment that just is heartbreaking. And so one of the things that have heard you talk about is that there is a kind of inevitability to what's happening, which is difficult to hear. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah. Look, human nature is a constant. The reason a book about Cain and Abel is just as relevant, in the 2020s as it was in at the dawn of creation, the dawn of human civilization, is because that
Yeah,
hasn't changed. It's like the first action of the first true humans was fratricide, not just
yeah,
murder, but murder of your brother, right? So there's a reason why these themes are perennial, and it's because this is human nature. Like, we have within us this fight between good and evil, and so we're not we are not infinite creatures, right? Like, we are human beings in a body. We come into the world, we have a certain life cycle, and it plays out the way it plays out. So there's really nothing, as Ecclesiastes says, there's nothing new under the sun. Like, every story has been told, everything has been written before, and it's really just about like your take on your time with these, I don't know, certain set of themes that we're given as human beings. You really can't escape it.
yeah,
So anti-Semitism is one of those things. It's not only 70 or 80 years old. It's not only 2,000 years old. It's like 4,000 years old. And in fact, you see it all the way back to the beginning with this fratricide, right?
yeah,
So to think that we are the generation who's going to put an end, like, there have been movements who have said we've defeated anti-Semitism. One of them was East Germany, for example. We've defeated anti-Semitism in our midst. Really, what they did was they suppressed Jews and made them all flee,
right.
because they made life so unbearable for them that it's like, okay, there's like 1,000 Jews left in East Germany by the time the wall goes up. And then they're just denying that there's any former Nazis in their midst. It's just denial. Okay.
Yeah,
So fast forward. So now we're in this time where we're at or near the peak of another anti-Semitic cycle. And what you see is just like the flywheel of the activism and of the crap messaging. Like, all of the messaging is based on constructs and lies. This anti-Semitic messaging, it's the same tropes that are being used again. It's like the blood libel. It's so nothing about this is new. And so why do we think that we're going to be the generation to defeat it? How? Like, where are the heroes that are like vanquishing anti-Semitism in our midst? It's like, the more you raise awareness about it, and the more you try to come at it with facts and logic, the more hate it produces.
Yeah.
So at a
Yeah.
certain point, you have to go, crap, I think this is just going to play out the way it's going to play out. It's because it's a spirit, and there's
Yeah.
really nothing that we can do to stop it. So,
Yeah.
okay, now's the time to like prepare yourself and learn from people who endured times like this, whether you're Jewish or not. So I look to people like Saint Maria of Paris,
Yeah.
who, and Saint Alexander Schmarel, Saint Maximilian Kolbe, people who made, these unsung heroes, like we were talking about, these normal people. These were not celebrities or whatever. They were people trying to do the best they could in these
Yeah.
extraordinary times to just make their own moral calculus. And the way that I've been, there's a lot we could talk about in terms of, the voices that are out there speaking for things like Christianity, and
Yeah.
how to discern
Yeah.
which voices are on which side of this. And
Yeah.
that's going to be a really important thing for people to understand.
So I want you just to keep going and expanding on some of these thoughts. And so, first of all, just the inevitability of this,
Yeah.
and I'm really glad that we covered some of the woo-woo ground. I think because unless you have a grasp of that, this doesn't make sense as much. This
No.
spirit that is moving amongst the people, and I can't remember whether it was my conversation with Martin Shaw or Pajot, but it might have been Martin, where he said that the Old Testament, those stories, they're not so much to do about the past. They are like these eternal, ever-present stories that are just re-emerging constantly.
Yeah.
And so whether it be the story of the Tower of Babel or Pentecost or the flood or all those stories, they are playing out kind of in constantly, like right now, all the time. And it's almost as if each human generation is given like the same set of challenges that our predecessors faced, almost as a kind of sense of equality from God, that each generation can't say, well, that generation had it better, that had it worse. It's like, well, no, each generation is being kind of judged on the same set of dilemmas and questions and things to grapple with, which is an interesting thought. But no, please carry on. And when you're talking about the discernment of whose voices you're listening to, what are you referring to specifically there?
Well, we can start by, there's a certain bag of tricks that uh, that are like ways that Jew hatred presents itself. Like I said, the blood libel, the like drinking the blood of children, the Jews control all the banks, and blah blah blah.
Control the
Okay,
world, Elders of Zion
Elders of
protocols.
Zion stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, that you can educate yourself about. You can
Yeah.
educate yourself out of that.
Yeah.
Hitler, for example, was like a big fan of the protocols of elders of Zion, and built a political movement on the back of a Russian forgery. Okay.
Yeah.
But that Russian forgery was also playing on tropes that had existed before it. So, fine. If you are the kind of person who says, I have learned that hating Jews is wrong and bad, and I've heard that there's some tropes that come along with it, I'm going to educate myself on these. Okay. That's
Yeah.
great. You can do that. You should do that. But when you're dealing with a spirit, you can't educate yourself out of that. And think of all the times that we have tried to, we've said, oh, we just need more education, right? It's like, oh, we have, teen pregnancy and abortion at all-time highs. We'll just educate ourselves out of that. We just need more comprehensive sex education. It's like,
Right.
it doesn't work. Education's not the answer when you're dealing with a spirit.
Wow. This is a profound perspective, and it speaks to, I think, Hungary has recently tried to incentivize its population to have more babies with tax incentives, and they've done so much to do it that you think, well, why isn't everyone having babies? And it actually hasn't
No.
increased the birth rate.
So it's not education. And in fact, where we see most of the problem is among the most educated. So, and it was like
Oh,
that.
that's a depressing good point. Yes, 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 yes.
But the same thing was true in the 1800s with the rise of popular anti-Semitism in that movement that led to the pogroms in Russia and then ultimately to the Holocaust. It was among the intellectual, educated elite.
Yes, it's always the intellectuals.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
that's a pattern. That's how it is. So we're
yeah,
not going to educate ourselves out of it. All right. So we recently saw on the Joe Rogan show Douglas Murray, who is an incredibly educated person, but actually knows his stuff. I read his book on October 7th. It was excellent. And I was really excited to see him do this interview.
yeah,
And then he gets on with Joe and that comedian with the really
yeah. I
basic
know the one
name.
you're talking about.
Uh,
Yeah,
anyway, and they start attacking the fact that he actually knows what he's talking about. So
yeah,
that was horrifying because I knew everything that these other guys were saying. It was like the you can trace the social media accounts where they're getting their information. Whereas like,
yes,
and the fact that Douglas Murray had been a war correspondent and like been there, they didn't value that at all. So
yeah,
you have this
yeah,
real twisting of education, and it's like this flipping, this inversion of who who's qualified to talk about these really important movements and historical facts, and like so now we think, now the value of the culture is that if I have an this is not all podcasters, okay, but like if I'm a podcaster sitting in my basement having 4-hour conversations with my chat
yeah, yeah,
and making a beautiful mind, red string connections that all
yeah,
somehow like tend to come back to the Jews because I'm like caught in an algorithm, like that makes me more qualified to weigh in on geopolitics.
yeah.
That's really weird.
It
So
is. Yeah,
the discernment, it comes in, and some of this I don't know how to explain because it should be so basic. But what I've started looking at is so I know the tropes, okay? I know the anti-Jewish tropes. When I hear
yeah.
people espousing them, I go, the ones who are calling themselves Christians are the most dangerous.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Explain.
Okay. So I'm specifically talking about the Candace Owens of the world, people like
Yeah,
that, okay?
yeah,
Who have this Christ is king thing, and they're claiming the mantle of Christianity, but there's no love. Jesus didn't say everybody will know you're my disciples by how much truthiness you have, how much truthiness you espouse based on whatever like political silo you're in.
yeah,
He didn't say that. He didn't even say they'll know you're Christians because you have all the facts or because you have the right argument. He said they'll know you are Christians by your love for one another. And I just think, okay, I do not believe that as humans we are made to live in a global society. We're too small. We're really meant to know about 20 or 30 people in our lives and dig deep and build relationships with like a village size community,
yeah. A parish.
a parish. Humans work
Yeah,
really, really well on the parish level. They work terribly on the global level.
yeah,
Okay, so when I think about my parish, I think about this elderly woman who is constantly coming up to me and asking me about my kids. And
yeah.
sometimes I wear a Star of David to church, and that doesn't make a lot of people happy. She was always the one to come over to me and say, I'm so glad you're wearing that. It's really important
Oh,
that you're
beautiful.
wearing that.
Yeah,
And so, a mixture of different things. She'd bring the coffee cake. You know what I mean? This woman, she passed away recently, but she was the most loving person in my parish. And there's a
bless
sense
her.
of like, with all my heart, with all my being, I want to be like Evangeline. I want to be like her
Yes. Yeah,
because
yeah.
she's
That's
so
beautiful.
full of love. She's so full of the presence of God, the presence of
Yeah,
Christ,
yeah,
that that could change the world, or at least it could change
yes.
my world, my parish, my family. If
Yeah,
leaned into that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But somebody pontificating for hours, it's like, and you can see it on their face. You can see
Mm.
just this, like, it's like the muscles that are being used in their face, they're the anti-love muscles. You know what I
The
mean?
the wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yes. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
and I just want to say, how dare you appropriate the Lord of Love
Yeah.
to promote lies and hate? And I don't mean hate like, the Southern Poverty Law Center kind of stuff. I mean like
Yeah.
hatred like Cain. It's like you're using the skin of Abel to promote Cain. Why?
Yeah. There's a thought I have here, which is, we've talked about people not having ideas, ideas having people
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the time. And we've talked about spirits moving through people. And one of the things that baptism is about in the church is the Holy Spirit entering the temple of your heart. And that is the motivating spirit in your life now.
Yeah.
Not being a Republican, not being a Democrat, not being a this or a that or the other.
Right.
The Lord you're serving now is the spirit motivating you. That is the spirit that has you. The Holy Spirit, one of the Trinity, one of God in your heart. And that's the spirit now that has you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's beautiful. And it's deliberate and intentional. And the ritual is there, the priest, the godparents, the family, in the presence of the icons. It's a holy moment. And it's like what we're seeing in the culture right now with these various things, whether they be deliberately and overtly occult, or whether they are wolf in sheep's clothing, or whether it's the kind of strange kind of postmodern world which is completely in denial of all of that and yet is almost most possessed by it.
Mm-hmm.
That is kind of like the other demons and the other spirits. If people can grapple with that imagery, I think they're going to be able to understand a lot here in
Yeah.
the kind of stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Rod Dreher talks in Living in Wonder about the role of AI and the UFO craze in all of
Okay.
this. Not UFO craze, but like manifestations that people see. You know, and so it doesn't have to take the form of the occult, or of it could take the form of science.
Yep.
But if you have a scientist who is filled with the Holy Spirit, they're going to have a different set of concerns than a scientist who thinks that we can transcend humanity, like Peter Thiel.
Right.
It's a
Yes.
difference in
Yes.
kind.
Yeah.
Not to throw shade on Peter Thiel, I don't know him, but
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so I think about when Jesus says, he comes out of the wilderness after his temptation, and his first words are, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand, right? Okay. When I say that phrase, I think most people will envision a guy on a New York City street corner with a megaphone and a big sign, hand scrawled, like, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand, meaning all you sinners, you're all going to hell unless
Mm.
you like join my club.
Yeah.
And that's really not what he's saying at all. The word repent, metanoia, means to turn, right? I think about this daily.
Yep.
I think about, okay, because in the Orthodox liturgy we say, that God may grant us a life of peace and repentance,
Yeah.
right? Okay, peace and repentance. Repentance doesn't mean like flailing yourself with and beating yourself up or whatever, or like crying and tearing yourself up. Yes, I'm a sinner, like I'm the first, but to repent means to turn. So to turn to what? To turn
Yeah.
toward like a better way of life? No, to turn toward the face of God. It's like when you take your kid's face and you're like, look at me. You're
Right.
repenting them. You're making them look you square in the eye, and like You're like, get your cues from me, get your information from me. Don't get it from that comedian guy. Don't get it from Candace Owens. Like, look at me. What am I telling you? Repent,
Right.
turn to me.
Yeah.
Why? Because the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And in other places, he says, the kingdom of heaven is within you.
Yeah.
It's like, that's what it's meant to be. We're like so focused on him that his life literally is lived through us. And that's
Yeah.
how we bring peace to our parish. You know, I don't even want to say the world, but like if
Yeah.
everybody was to do that, like that's the paradigm he's calling us to.
Yeah.
And what is his
And it,
spirit? His spirit is peace, love, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. It's all of these things. It's
yeah.
not shouting and make and conspiracizing.
Yeah. Being a conspiracy
Yes.
theorist or something. Yes,
Conspiracy
exactly.
theorizing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so this is kind of um witnessed in the lives of the saints, in the lives of people at your parish, that old lady, God bless her,
Mhm.
in the life of Seraphim of Sarov, who,
Yeah.
it's so strange to even think about how someone isn't just trying to be motivated by just being like the most famous guy. I mean, in terms of what Saint Seraphim of Sarov did, he retreated into the forest, and it's like through that quiet prayerfulness, like just transformed the lives of those around him, the thousands of people in the neighboring towns and forests and stuff.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
and
he
there's something
says
very
his most famous quote, acquire the spirit of peace and 1,000 around you will be saved.
there we go. Yeah. And that is not social media.
No.
That is not. And so it's strange to kind of walk this line, and therein is the temptation of the artist to become the activist,
Right.
because it's almost like the little serpent there is tempting you. So hey, why spend years in the wilderness trying to attain that purity of heart, when if you want to really change the lives of thousands of people, post more.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like that's kind of what the temptation is right now. And like, look, I do podcasts, but like I'm trying to almost break the fourth wall of this and
Right.
go like how are we meant to conduct
Yeah.
ourselves here when we're trying to talk about things in the world? How is it that we're meant to tackle evil? How are we meant to really approach this topic? And is what we're doing even working?
Right.
And it's taken me a long time, not just over the last sort of 2 years since October the 7th, but add up all the time from being a teenager and sort of being fascinated with the power of film, the power of the image,
Hmm.
to actually realize that it really doesn't have, like, it has power, but it's not maybe the kind of power, like the thing that you really want to be employing all the
Yeah.
time, constantly.
Yeah.
I think my wife wrote an article on Substack yesterday, and it said that I think the average person gets something like 72 gigabytes of date, like news in their day. Like one day, we get like 72 gigabytes worth of articles and pictures and videos.
Well,
And she compares that to how a person would have like the whole year would have maybe reached that amount, like just 200 years ago or
yeah.
something, and now we're getting it every day.
Yeah.
And as Martin Shaw said, with the internet and the social media companies promising us connection, they promised us Pentecost, which we're all going to speak the same language and connect and get along and be closer together, but really we're just getting babel.
Yeah.
We're all being divided and split apart and completely speaking differently to each other and being more isolated. And
Right.
I don't know if you share those sentiments as well.
Yeah. Well, I think, when I reached a point of saturation, uh, posting about October 7th related things. Now, when it first happened, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm perfectly equipped
Yeah,
to be a voice for change in this moment
yeah,
because
yeah,
I not only like know my history really well, but I've written a book about it and it's used in high school curricula and like, so it's like, okay, perfect time. So I conducted some interviews and I posted a lot on my Instagram and I, started writing more on Substack until I realized that the only people who were liking it were people who already agreed with me, and
yeah,
that the people on the other side who needed the information the most were never going to see me. They were
yeah,
never going to
yeah,
access it. And I was like,
yeah,
well, I certainly don't want to pour more time and energy into this if
yeah,
it's not moving the ball forward. And so, and in fact, earlier this year, I had a situation where Now I have 10 years of receipts here, okay, for what I do and what I talk about. My message hasn't changed. And I came on board with a new agent, a new literary agent. And 2 days after signing a contract with this person, I posted a couple things about the hostages. And this person called me and said, "I'm sorry, we can't work together. We're too far apart on Palestine."
Wow.
And
Wow.
she broke a contract with me.
Just for posting about hostages?
Yeah. I didn't even
Isn't that
post
like one
about
of the
Palestine. I posted about the hostages.
Yeah. I've received some strange messages from people close to me as well when I've posted about great news, like a hostage just got rescued,
No,
and just like
they think that's bad
getting the
news.
weirdest messages,
Okay, so like
you know?
if that's the zeitgeist, or or at least it's like a certain, like the lines have been drawn, right? So I'm one person, and this is kind of the conundrum. It's like when you're a decently public person, you have stuff out there on the public record. I mean, I've done interviews that you can find. You can, it's like, do I go underground now?
Right.
So if my values are, I want to live as somebody who the kingdom of God is in, right? And I want
Yeah.
to be repenting, turning to the face of God. Should I be quiet? Like, is it serving anything
Yeah.
to like just put my voice more out there into the wind? And
Yeah.
so anyway, after that whole thing happened with that agent, I pulled way back. I posted something on my Substack saying everything's going behind a paywall. I'm no longer going to post anything political on Instagram, not because I'm afraid of being canceled or whatever. I didn't have a ton of respect for that person's attempts to cancel me or whatever. Like, I don't care.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, and I landed on my feet, thank God.
Yeah.
But this is where it takes discernment, and I don't have the answers for this yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to
And this is what I want.
navigate the
Yeah.
wilderness.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of at the heart of this conversation,
Yeah.
and what we've kind of been trying to get at in our conversations over WhatsApp and stuff over the last week or two is, okay, look, like both of us grapple and kind of understand the landscape of what's happening politically, what's happened historically. We are kind of equipped with a you could call it a spiritual or symbolic understanding of some of these patterns that are playing out and some of these forces that are underlying things.
Hmm.
What do you do now? You know, and
Yeah.
similarly, I'm torn with it as well, because there's content that I've got ready on this, ready to go, like over the next few days,
Sure.
and I'm split, because it's like, well, I kind of know that it's probably going to only reach the people that already agree with it, and is this going to be something that is actually worth not only like my time, but also the people's time watching it?
Yeah.
Am I going to regret this in 5 or 10 years, like just responding to the stuff in the news and trying to get something out there about this particular issue? Because in 5 years it'll be something else, or in 1 year it'll be something else, and it's like it's just this hamster wheel.
Yeah.
And being torn between that and just going silent. But as a filmmaker, it's kind of like in my business to create,
Yeah.
and it's with visual media, and tell stories, and talk about things. And it's a strange one, because I think both of us are inspired by Solzhenitsyn
Yeah.
and others like him, to live not by lies, and to understand that it is this kind of willingness to go along with the lies,
Hmm.
which lands a country, a region like the Soviet Union, into massacring like 100 million people or
Yeah.
something, or whatever it was. And so I don't know whether you have any other thoughts on that, but it might be a good time right now to talk about Elijah. Yeah.
Before we go there,
Yeah.
I think part of the discernment is knowing how you as a person are wired. And
Yeah.
I am not the type of person who's going to go live in a hermitage.
Yeah.
I'm an extrovert.
Yeah.
I'm mouthy. I'm a New Yorker. I'm opinionated, and that's how I'm wired. There's nothing wrong with those things, right? And I
Yeah.
also am an artist who's really like committed to my craft. And so where I'm coming down now is that My responsibility, given the person that I am individually, is to make the best work I've ever made in my life by focusing on my craft, understanding the things that I do well, and leaving the rest up to God. Like,
Yeah.
because part of, I think this is the last I'll say on the activist thing.
Yeah.
My daughter and I were talking about this recently, and she's like, well, what makes art activist? And I had to think about it because there's actually a lot of political art that's really important in art history. I mean, we have some of our greatest works that are dealing with things like battles and, and I said, activist art is the art that has the conclusion first and tries to squeeze all of the making of the work into the conclusion.
Yeah.
And that is not a worthwhile. That's propaganda. That's the definition of
Yeah.
propaganda. You start with the
Yeah.
conclusion, make everything fit into that. And just
Yeah.
as a person, I don't want to live like that. I
Yeah.
feel like to make that kind of work or to be that kind of person would make me really a drag to be around. And
Yeah.
I have like real people, like a husband and children, who would like me to be
Yeah.
at peace.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to acquire that spirit of peace, which is like just just do the work. Like, because I said I'm not a political pundit, right? So I had a podcast that I started in 2020. I haven't used it in a couple of years because it doesn't seem like that's the right thing for me. But when I speak in public to an audience that is there,
Yeah.
the human beings are there, a lot gets done. A lot.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think, okay, as much human interaction as we can have, using my work as, a conversation starter or whatever it is, or just, having integrity on its own, or like having a lot of people at my dinner table, or just opening my front door to someone who wants to come over and have coffee or whatever,
Yeah.
living in the real world and like acquiring a spirit of peace and trying to like remember that the Lord of love lives in here and let that come out rather than like my fleshly, because all of this stuff, it's the passions, it's the flesh, that
Right.
desire to control, I left that behind.
Yeah.
you know I
Yeah.
repented. I turned toward a different way of being.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something, to use a, for people outside of a Christian faith, a word that people are really uncomfortable with, blaspheme. There's a kind of blaspheming going on when the Christian who has accepted Christ no longer actually worships Christ, but it becomes like a background thing,
Yep.
and your political views become your foreground
Hmm.
at the expense of Christ. And I think there is a way of doing. I'm not saying you just don't ever talk about politics as a
Yeah.
Christian. It's not what I'm saying.
Right.
But you can almost tell in the spirit and the way someone talks about things, which comes first for someone. And so when I do speak to, and just I've mentioned them a few times now, Pajot, Jonathan Pajot, and Martin Shaw, I can tell when I speak to them, and I complimented them both on this in the podcast. Is that I can tell the way you conduct yourself is different from a lot of people, and I was asking them about that.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm trying to get at is that there's something there. I'm not there yet, and I'm looking at it. I'm going. I see that that's better. I see that that's. I see that what the alternative is really not good,
Yeah.
and I think it's driving us all
Yeah.
insane.
Literally.
And I and look, I like this idea that there's not one size fits all for everyone. We're all different.
Right.
We're all created differently, and have our different skill sets. And not everyone is going to be Saint Seraphim of Sarov.
Right.
Because to kind of contrast that, there's a beautiful icon I saw today. I forget the saint's name, but the icon of this saint is him literally setting a fire to a picture of Stalin. Have you seen that
Yes.
one?
Yeah. I know the story
Yeah, yeah,
of it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Can't
And
remember his name, but yeah, that was amazing.
yeah, he's setting fire to like an image with Stalin's face on it. Is it either Stalin or Lenin? No, Lenin. It might have been Lenin's face. I
You
can't
know,
remember. Anyway,
do you know Harmony, the channel, the YouTube channel Harmony?
no.
They make the most amazing videos about like Orthodox saints and things like that. It comes out of the Death to
Okay,
the World zine.
okay.
But
I'll check it
they
out.
did a whole thing on that saint. I can't remember. I wish I could give you more information, but
Yeah,
I'll try to find the video.
yeah, yeah. So essentially, what I'm trying to say is that there is there's a sort of there's ways of being badass that kind of can fit into that same thing, where again you've got the priorities straight here. Again, I'm talking from a Christian perspective. And so for me, and I guess maybe this is the reason why I'm grappling with it so difficult, because I kind of like both. I like the idea of retreating and I like the idea of confronting. And it's like, and it's funny because my baptismal name, baptism will be next month actually, after like a year and a half of catechism. My name's Ali, which is the Arabic kind of version of the Hebrew Eli, like Elijah.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, he will be the patron saint for me.
Amazing.
And his life is kind of exactly that. It's something that I've grappled with for a long time, but it's like, here he is, someone who had to flee into the wilderness because the world got really crazy. Like you were saying,
Mm-hmm.
do I go into hiding now? And it's there that he's fed by the ravens, and when the time is opportune, when he's called to do so,
Yes.
not on his own accord, when he's
Yes.
called to do so, confronts King Ahab. And the way he does it is so crazy and almost funny. The way he mocks the priest of Baal,
Mm-hmm.
and then the last detail of that whole saga is that he ends up slaying all the priests of Baal, and you think, whoa, okay,
Didn't see that coming.
and he appears. I know, and it's like that's not the kind of holy man pacifist that you're used to seeing.
Right.
And it's the old covenant and everything, but he appears alongside Christ at the Transfiguration
Mm-hmm.
on the mountain.
Yeah.
So anyway, there's just something fascinating about that. And so I did want to talk to you about this idea of, if we are going to speak up about this, is there something we could learn from Elijah here in this idea of mocking the priests of Baal, and what that could even look like today?
Well, I think it comes back to which voice you're listening to
Yeah,
and who's setting your paradigm. So Jesus went into the wilderness actually often. I mean, he went for his temptation for 40 days, but he also frequently retreated, to desolate places to pray, to be
yeah,
alone with the Father. And then he would come back and be the man of action and be the man who not just healed. It says, he healed everybody of their diseases who came to him,
yeah,
but also, made a whip of cords and drove the money changers out of the temple.
yeah,
Right. So there was obviously being God himself, like there was nobody else who was more tuned in to the moment that the Father had for him than Jesus.
yeah.
So,
It's almost like, I think it's almost like what you're listening to, that still small voice in the breeze, which is what Elijah did.
yeah.
It's I guess listening to that inner voice, and I guess if that internal dialogue is like, this is the right time or this isn't the right time, then I guess following that.
So we
And I think
know,
what that
right?
yeah,
We know that this has been studied, that social media use is correlated with the deterioration of the inner voice. We
right,
know that.
interesting,
Okay.
wow,
It's like the social media, the connection that we were promised, this counterfeit connection, winds up replacing our inner dialogue. Okay. So
yeah,
the more exposure to, look, I am guilty of this because when I have, like, so as an artist, there's plenty that's like, about ideas and about inspiration and it's groovy and all of that. But like more than that, there's about putting the pencil to the paper, and it's very task oriented. So, I'll put my AirPods in and I'll listen to podcasts all day. And
yeah,
I did that for years, thinking, oh, good, this is bypassing my cognitive mind so that I can be more intuitive with my paintings. I told myself that.
yeah,
And I have to conclude after several years of doing this that it didn't work. It made me more
interesting,
anxious, more confused, more distractible, hard to focus, and, you know, there was when I wrote my first novel, all of the information that I was using to, because I wasn't trained as a writer, I came to writing pretty late. what I knew how I the way I knew how to write was in my journal.
Yeah.
So that whole book was essentially written from my journals, like from my processing of life and the world around me and human relationships from my journals. Subsequent to that, I journaled a lot less because I was busier. And I think it affected the writing. I mean, I still hope it's good writing, but I'm conscious that I need to turn the ship back to the most real and human way of making my work that's not influenced by these outside voices. So, what I'm trying to, to tie it back to Elijah is like, he didn't have social media. Okay. In the wilderness, he didn't even have a newspaper. He was communing with God. So his ability to hear that still small voice was because he knew how to be quiet. He knew how to
Yeah.
quiet his mind, and he didn't miss it. And he also didn't have like other still small voices. I don't know, maybe he had the
Yeah.
devil talking to
Yeah.
him too, but he could discern that because the information was not such a bombardment,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. And I always try to, whenever talking about this kind of stuff, I always like to try and formulate a bit of a bridge for people who are just like not there yet with like trying to understand things that way in terms of like literally like the devil talking to you.
Sure,
But
sure.
in terms of like just I think everyone can agree that social media is using all kinds of subliminal messaging in
Yeah.
not only like marketing, but there are countries that invest a lot of money on narrative control,
Yeah.
and it's coming from all sides.
Yeah.
It's of course it's Iran and it's Russia and it's China,
Well, we
but
know we were doing it.
it's yeah, yeah, everyone's doing it, and and then so you're dealing with the marketing,
Hmm.
you're dealing with government propaganda, and then you're dealing with your friends or supposed
Your
friends,
peers.
yeah, curating messages that they want to communicate to you, which aren't really reality either,
Right.
and we're all kind of swimming in this weird pool, um, and it's very hard to discern reality at that point.
One of the things that the Stasi used to do is they would have access to your apartment. They'd break into your apartment while you were at work, and let's say you had your desk arranged a certain way, right? And you had like a picture of your kids on your desk. Well, the Stasi would come in and they would just move it over 2 inches, or they'd go through your drawers and they'd kind of like switch something in your drawer.
Wow.
Okay. It was called Zersetzung. It was like the subtle undermining of your sense of reality. It was like
Wow.
gaslighting par excellence, right?
Wow.
Do we not think that we're so much more sophisticated than that now in terms of
Yeah.
our ability to do that to each other, and that
Yeah.
governments like so there's a lot of like young guys coming into my church. This is true everywhere in traditional churches, right? So mostly young men coming in, and they're mostly coming in because they saw something about Orthodoxy or Catholicism on the internet, right? They've watched a lot of videos and now they're coming in. And like, we even had a couple of guys come in recently who brand new, first time at liturgy, and they're like, "Oh, we believe Orthodoxy is the one true faith." And I'm like, "Well, have you ever been to liturgy?" "No, we just saw it on YouTube." Okay. And so, like, concurrent with that, they happen to be bringing a lot of internet, like Martin said this in your conversation. You get to the pearly gates and St. Peter says, "I can't let you in, you smell of the internet." It's like that.
Such
It's
a
like,
great line.
so, you exist in this like internet, consciousness, right? And then like all of a sudden you get around real people and it gets really awkward because you don't know how
Right.
to interact with real people, or like what to say and whatnot. And
Yeah.
so part of getting back to the real is shedding the internet off of you and learning to interact with real humans again.
Mm. Shedding the internet off of you. Oh, that feels so uncomfortable to even think about. Isn't that weird? Like it's become such a comfort blanket,
Yeah, it's
the
like, what will
internet,
I
you know?
do? What will I do if I
I
can't
know.
check my phone? But for a lot of people, and I'm
Yeah.
not dictating anything to anybody, okay? But I'm just saying, a
Yeah.
lot of people are waking up to this
Yeah.
and are going back to flip phones or
Yeah.
to the Wise phone or, something like this
Yeah.
where, okay, I recognize I need a certain amount of functionality for my job or whatnot, but like I don't need
Yeah.
to have this thing being the still small voice in my head all the time. That's not
Yeah.
proper.
No, I was just saying what we've covered so much today, and I've some pennies have dropped for me in terms of how I've started to now, I guess, perceive this entire conflict, this entire phenomena of the rise of anti-Semitism. And after 2 years of scratching my head and going, well, how could it be that when someone says something that's so patently false and I debunk it with information, that person doesn't change their mind, they double down. And it's happened to people that are very intelligent. Like I know intelligent people who work in hospitals in the country I'm in right now, who genuinely believe that the COVID vaccine, the COVID virus was a Jewish conspiracy to infect the world with a disease that would require them to inject themselves with the Jewish made vaccine that has inbuilt with it some kind of code that will one day depopulate the world, and that the whole world is run by this Jewish cabal, and that it's all part of the Zionist expansion to take over the world, and they want to take over the world, and they want to depopulate the goyim, and they're all about. And I had to just look at them and just think, you're dealing with patients in a hospital. You're dealing with patients in a hospital, you know, and this is common belief now, you know.
Get
And
this,
it doesn't matter
Holly.
how many times you explain this to them,
Yeah.
and you don't say like, okay, well, how could it be that you got like a tiny group of people? You don't think China's more close to taking over the world, where where the virus originated from? Like, it's not China? No,
No, no,
okay.
yeah. So get
No,
this.
yeah,
The where Nazism spread first in the third in Germany was among doctors and lawyers.
you're kidding.
Those were
You're
the
kidding.
professions that were like immediately corrupted.
Wow.
Medicine and the law. I
Okay,
mean,
well, that kind of makes sense about some of the two-tier policing and stuff that we've seen, but
oh,
certainly
yeah,
with the, I mean, and also another thing in Australia that happened was that viral video of those two nurses
yeah,
joking about killing Jewish patients.
yeah. No, that's why it's an effing spirit.
Yeah,
Okay? You can't educate that out of people. Like you said, you can present, like you had Einat Wilf on.
yeah,
That woman, like, there is no bigger truth teller than her, and she's just telling it as it is. It's like her history is impeccable. Okay?
yeah,
Everybody should watch that episode if you want to understand the nature of what's going on in the Middle East and with the conflict. That's the episode you should watch. It's great. You could present
yeah,
that to I know people who I could present that to, like people who I went to school with who watched me create What the Night Sings and know the whole story. If I
yeah.
went to them with that episode with I not, they would still be like, F the Zionists.
Right. Yeah,
They should, it's like
yeah,
Liberation Day or whatever. I actually had a woman come up to me at my high school reunion a couple of years ago, and I told her that my son was in the military, and at first she was like, "Wow, you must really worry for his safety." And so I said, and so I thought, oh, we're having like a mom moment here,
yeah.
and I said, yeah, I really pray for peace, and it was like this weird thing came over her really suddenly, and she goes, "Oh no, I don't pray for peace. I pray for liberation." And I'm thinking, what what the F did you
What does
just
that
say
mean?
to me? Like,
What does that mean?
what do you
Yeah,
mean?
right.
And like, is your expectation, your unconscious expectation that my son is going to lay his life down for your concept of liberation? P.S. I know
Yeah,
exactly what you're talking about when you say liberation. I know the historical record. Like, I know where that
yeah,
language comes from. It's Marxism.
yeah,
Like, you can't fool me.
yeah,
So it's a spirit.
yeah. It's a spirit.
When you see people's
Oh
personalities
man.
change, I mean, that's what you
Yeah,
and I have been watching for the last couple of years is like some really weird personality changes.
yeah. Yeah. Well, this is why people are kind of going, okay, what's just happened? Okay, what's just happened to Tucker Carlson? What's happened to Candace Owens? What's happened to like a whole heap of people? And I think part of the irony is that people are kind of looking at me and going, "What's happened to Ali? You know, why is he defending the?" And I'm like, guys, like I actually kind of don't really care what people think or say about
Yeah.
Israel. I'm just thinking, I just think the hyper fixation and hatred on Israel has it
It's
makes no sense.
obsession.
It makes no sense. It's an obsession. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and it kind of like bring it back to just I wanted to explore this one more time with you. The
Yeah.
the Cain and Abel story. Do you think this kind of thing is playing out with this? Because that does have connotations to the Jewish people,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah. Okay. So Cain and Abel, there's a Talmudic interpretation of it, retelling of it from Targum Jonathan. And when it says that Cain Cain and Abel went out into the field and like Cain had words with his brother, right? So this it has been like a question mark, like what the Bible's pretty silent on like what led to the conflict, right? So
Right.
tradition has it that when they go out into the field, they're discussing the nature of their sacrifices, right? And like why wasn't mine accepted and whatever. And Abel is telling him, look, God is just. If you just do the right thing, if you bring the sacrifice he's asked you for, it's going to be fine. And Cain's response is, there is no judge. There's no justice. No matter what I do, it's not going to be good enough. And so there's no judge. Like he concludes that his paltry offering is evidence that there's no God.
Right.
I mean, those two things don't even make sense, right? And so instead of turning to himself and saying, how can I change? How can I repent, right? He he inverts it and turns his ire on his brother. I mean, I know Jordan Peterson has talked about this, like he kills his ideal. I don't really resonate with that reasoning.
Yeah.
I just think it's like a classic inversion. When you see exactly what we're talking about here, like people's personalities change, or like it seems like everything is upside down and it's flipped, like that's what's happening there. So instead of taking stock himself and repenting, he flips the blame, he places the blame on someone that has nothing to do with it, and in fact on the very person who's making the proper sacrifice. It's resentment,
Okay.
it's offense. And so that's what you see. Okay, I grew up in a Jewish home. I grew up in a community, a Jewish community, synagogue. And so I feel like my Christianity is really permeated by Jewish ethics. Like I've been
Yeah.
in a lot of synagogues, I've known a lot of Jewish people. This is not a community that I'm unfamiliar with, okay? And my sense of myself as a Christian is as somebody who follows the Jewish Messiah, right?
Yeah.
All of the ethics, all of the paradigm, the worldview, it's Jewish.
Yeah.
So what I know about the Jewish people is they have a really strong survival instinct, but they are really for peace. It's always
Yeah.
been that way. It's like God tells he puts in Deuteronomy, he puts the choice before the people of Israel, and he says, life or death, these are your two choices. Pursue the way of life or pursue the way of death. I'm going to tell you how it's going to go if you pursue one way or the other, right? So you
Yeah.
have, 5,000 years of the people of Israel pursue, like, not perfectly, not everybody, not, but I'm saying, like, as a mindset, sometimes getting it wrong, sometimes getting it off into the weeds, but always kind of being called back to the way of peace.
Yeah. It's all in the Psalms. It's like there's a lot of words of peace
Yeah, it
and I
so
know what you're saying.
permeates the Jewish consciousness that, like, after the Holocaust, the instinct was not to be like, we're the put upon victims, but to
Yeah.
say, this happened to us, and we want to put all of our effort into not just this never happening again to us, but anywhere. Okay?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was Jews who coined the term genocide. It was Jews who
Yeah.
termed the coined the term Holocaust. In
Yeah.
the Holocaust Museum in DC, there's an entire permanent exhibit dedicated to other genocides.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to then go and take like a genocidal massacre, right, which is what Hamas did on October 7th. It was their attempt to realize, just like Hitler said, I'm going to do this to the Jews. Hamas said, we're going to do this to the Jews. And on October 7th, they enacted their literal genocidal desires, right?
Yeah.
From the river to the sea, they mean it. They mean free of
Yeah.
Jews. No more Jews.
Yeah.
Get them out, ethnically cleanse, kill, whatever we have to do by any means necessary. So to then flip the script immediately to the Jews are the ones committing the genocide,
Yeah.
that will make you crazy if you try to figure it out. Except to
But
just say that's exactly what Cain did to Abel.
right. So wow, that's a really, really interesting insight. So this kind of turning to Abel and pinning the blame on him in a sense for his proper sacrifice, for
For the
his
very thing Cain failed at.
sorry, yes, yes. Wow. Okay. That's I'm gonna think about that a lot. That's really interesting. But do you think the motivating factor is a kind of a resentment? It's a rejection of order. It's or not order, but in the sense that the rejection of God and the way things are. Is it all wrapped up in that?
Yeah,
Like what's
it's all of that. It's a rejection of reality because you wish that reality was different.
yeah,
This is the project of communism, by the way.
yeah,
It's the project of communism and everything that came after. You know, of Marxism and neo-Marxism and all of these movements. It's
right,
like it's a theory of everything, right? We wish that so we decide that we can break the world into oppressor and oppressed, and we can take that template and we can put it onto every nation and people of the world.
yeah.
And
And
it's just
it
not true.
fails every time.
It fails
And it
every
fails every
time.
time because it's in opposition to
It's
reality.
not
You've
real.
got you've got the equation wrong.
Yeah.
And it's anti-reality in the sense that
Hmm.
through these kinds of radical Marxist ideologies, you do get kind of critical theories around gender and about all these types of things where if a man wants to be a woman, they can just say so. And just like that, they are, as if by magic. And
Right.
it's a kind of anti-reality ideology. And so you're saying that the kind of spirit of Cain is animating this.
Yes. That's a very good
Wow.
way to put it. Our culture is
Yeah.
animated by the spirit of Cain. And to use the metaphor I used before, it's Cain walking around in an Abel skin suit.
Whoa.
I wish it wasn't that way. I wish that I wish the world didn't work that way, but it does.
Yes. This in a sentence has described the modern mass activist movement,
Mhm.
which virtue signals, right? It puts on that virtue, but underneath it's not there. It's performance.
Yeah. I'm working on a memoir right now, and it's going to
Yeah.
be a graphic novel told in two parallel ways. One is a fairy tale that I'm creating, and the other is my real story. And it's a love letter to stories. It's a love letter to fairy tales. And one of the things I'm exploring right now, I've said for years jokingly, but it's like kind of not so joking, that I was raised by wolves. So in other words, like I had to fend for myself from a very early age. And so I'm creating this fairy tale about wolves. And there's these uh, different wolves in the pack, right? So in this story, I'm not really a wolf. I'm a bear. I'm like a bear cub. And but I'm growing up in this pack of wolves. And along comes this wolf who in real life is the person who abused me. And he looks like a wolf. But you start to notice in the illustrations that his eyes are hollow, And it turns out that he's just wearing a wolf skin. He's not a wolf
Right.
at all. And in fact, there's actually nothing under the wolf skin. He doesn't exist.
Or is that so what's animating the skin?
He's like a wraith, you know. He's like lost his personhood.
Like a spirit.
Yeah, a spirit. But then
Fascinating.
there's other wolves in this pack who represent my grandparents, who are also
Yeah.
not wolves, and they are enchanted like a classic fairy tale where they are really humans who have been turned into wolves, and it's up to me, the little bear cub, to set them free. I don't think I'm
Wow.
giving away too much because the whole story's not written yet. But anyway,
Yeah.
but spoiler alert, I'm not a bear cub either. I'm a little girl.
Right.
So it's the whole fairy tale is about what we put on or what is put on us to cancel out our personhood, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't want to live like that. And I don't want anybody I love to live like that. But I'm seeing it
Right.
more and more and more where we're losing ourselves, whether it's to these false narratives, whether it's to the activism, whether it's
Yeah.
to AI, where we don't even
Yeah.
think our own thoughts anymore. We
Yeah.
outsource our thinking to chat GPT or whatever. Or whether
Yeah.
it's to these false religions, you know?
Yeah.
Reality is really, really important to fight for. And when I say reality, as we've been talking through this whole conversation, I'm not just talking about, oh, the physical world that I see around me. Like, that's part of it. We are incarnate creatures, we're embodied creatures. We live in a real world that we have to, reattach to. But it's understanding properly the nature of the spiritual world that we don't see, which is just as real.
Yeah.
The,
I'm
the two
starting to
are
come
enmeshed
around.
like this.
Yeah. It's been a it's been a kind of shedding of skin for myself, getting rid of some of the narrow-mindedness of the kind of secular West that I've grown up in that has blinded me to it, and at my detriment. Because if you don't grapple with things through this lens, things get really confusing, and you can butt your head up against a wall forever. And so this is really valuable, and I just hope that, as we've come to the end of the conversation now, that at least people that might be new to this way of thinking may start to be a little bit more open to this being potentially what's actually going on.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the stuff that I think about a lot these days. And even though I post about the news and what's happening and sharing stuff about the world, I'm constantly analyzing patterns and seeing, okay, what's really going on here? What's the response here? And what is really playing out when it comes to this kind of, like we've been talking about, this kind of spirit that's come over people, that facts and logic has gone out the window. And I think it's been a falsity that we are just these rational beings, and that the more we get rid of myths and religion and faith and spirituality, all that stuff, if only we could free ourselves from this, finally humanity will rise up away and break from the chains of the irrationality of all of those made up stories.
Yeah.
And that's actually what's happened, is as we've broken away from them, I think we've become more irrational
We're untethered.
and more
Yeah.
unstable and more crazy, and thinking that, yeah, men can be a women, and all that kind of stuff. And we've just now curled ourselves into this tight knit mess of this festering anti-Semitism that's gonna, if it hasn't already exploded, it's gonna unravel further. It's not been good for society at large.
Yeah.
So
We're unmoored. We're floating
yeah,
about on a very stormy sea, and we're looking for things to tether our boat to. We're looking for a
yeah,
place to drop anchor, whatever, the metaphor. But
yeah,
we can look to these ancient truths that have not changed, and that have been the
mhm,
best navigational tools that we've had for thousands and
yeah,
thousands of years.
yeah,
The modern project is not working. It's a counterfeit. It's an attempt to escape reality, and we don't have to do that. We don't have to do that.
mhm,
What I'm trying to do in my books and with all the art that I make is not to change the world or anything like that, but I'm trying to offer my fellow travelers a navigational tool through the dark woods. So,
Yeah,
you know, if your listeners would like to read my work,
absolutely.
it's easily available. You know,
Yeah.
where
Well, this is what I
fine
wanted
books
to
are
ask you as
sold.
we
But
wrap up. No, it's exactly the thing I was going to ask you now, which is, for people that do want to find your work, where can they find you, and what top 3 books would you recommend that they head over and get as soon as this podcast finishes that really kind of highlights the best of your work?
well, it depends what age you're buying for. I illustrate children's picture books, so you can pick those up. But if you're interested in what we've been talking about, I would say my 3 novels, What the Night Sings, Berliners, and A Cloud of Outrageous Blue, are the
Yeah,
best place to start.
yeah,
You can in the English speaking world, they're very easy to get. You can get them at any bookstore or through any bookstore. And I have a Substack that I'm, you know, trying to be judicious about my use of it, and it's called
yeah,
Vesperisms.
yeah, yeah. I'll leave the links down below,
Great.
and I've read chapters of your books, and they're phenomenal. And I'm a very slow reader,
Me
and
too.
I get bored quickly. I get really bored quickly if I'm not gripped, and that's not what I found with your work.
Oh, thanks.
And if only I had a little bit more time, I would just sit in a corner and just read, like, What the Night Sings. I've really been gripped by that, and and I haven't started Berliners yet, but I'm really keen to, especially as we've talked about Cain and Abel,
Yeah.
and how you've described that to be a kind of retelling of that.
Hmm.
Look, it's been an absolute pleasure, and it's been one of the most unique podcasts I think I've ever done, because usually I stay so much in the world of what's happening geopolitically and all that kind of stuff. We're talking about kind of very, very kind of politically heavy topics, but I've never really gotten underneath this, which I'm deeply fascinated by, and I'm so glad that we've covered it this is the first episode that we've done this really in, and I hope that it's the first of many, and I hope people resonate with it, because man, it's just too interesting, and I think it feels closer to the truth than the alternative. So
Hmm.
thanks for going on this journey with me.
Thanks, Ellie. This is great.
Absolutely. Until next time, God bless.
You too.